History will be made. The midterm general election is Tuesday, November 8th, and top of mind, the race for Oregon governor. Can a Republican sit in the governor's mansion for the first time since 1987? What can a governor do to put an end to Oregon's persistent homeless crisis and rising gun violence? Can an unaffiliated candidate actually win this governor's race? We ask those questions and more. Plus, local races for U.S. House seats getting the national spotlight, why major national political players are keying on district races in Oregon and Southwest Washington. Joining me are political analyst and managing editor at Pamphlet Media, Dana Haynes. Coin 6, Eye on Northwest Politics Midterm Election Special starts now.
From Coin 6, your local election headquarters. This is an Eye on Northwest Politics Special.
Thank you for joining us for this Eye on Northwest Politics Midterm Election Special. I'm Ken Body. This midterm election is unlike any we've seen in generations in Oregon and Southwest Washington. There are a number of congressional seats up for grabs. Critical measures are on the ballot in Oregon, and of course, there will be a new governor in the state of Oregon. No matter who wins, it will be a woman. Who Oregon's governor will be is up to you, the voters. Over the next hour, we will break down these races and the major questions facing voters during these midterm elections. And joining me, our political analyst and managing editor with our news partners at Pamphlet Media, Dana Haynes. Dana has covered politics in this area for more than 20 years. And Dana, thanks for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We start tonight with the biggest race on the ballot, the race for Oregon governor. For the first time in American history, 3 women are the gubernatorial candidates. There's Democratic candidate and the longest tenured Oregon House Speaker, Tina Kotek, unaffiliated candidate and former Democratic state legislator, Betsy Johnson, and Republican candidate and former state representative, Christine Drazan. Drazan is seeking to be the first Republican to lead Oregon since the late Vic Atiyeh left office in 1987. The issue at the top of mind for most Oregonians, the homeless crisis. According to multiple surveys, including DHM Research and the Oregon Values and Belief Center, the homeless crisis and housing are the top 2 issues concerning voters in Oregon and Southwest Washington. Let's go now to Dana Haynes, managing editor of Pamphlet Media and the Portland Tribune. You know, Dana, it's not a surprise to see these 2 issues at the top of mind for most Oregon voters. It's not a coincidence that all 3 gubernatorial candidates are trying to get their message across to voters on how they would handle the homeless crisis if elected. Now, we'll hear from the candidates on that issue in just a moment, but Dana, we see local governments grappling with this issue. What powers does a governor actually have to deal with the homeless crisis?
Well, there's the bully pulpit. A governor gets to get people talking in conversations. A governor gets to set a slate of agendas. Easier to do if your parties are also controlling the House, the Senate, but possible to do even if they don't. Third, there's a lot of federal money floating around, and governors get to access some of that. And then just finally, you get to set the stage and decide how much of a priority it's going to be above everything else. What do you need to get done first? And if housing and homelessness is at the top of your list, then it's going to get some traction.
So you've got the power of the bully pulpit.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I've had all 3 of the Oregon gubernatorial candidates on our Sunday political show, Eye on Northwest Politics. I asked each one of them, one-on-one and uninterrupted, how they would handle the homeless crisis if elected governor.
On day one, for me, it means bringing a new urgency to helping people who are living on the street right now. That means increasing the number of outreach teams who are working with people who are living in tents, helping them get connected to services, getting them into shelter, and getting them into permanent housing. I believe we can do this. It's going to take urgency and focus. You know, one of the things that I worked on when I was speaker and still believe is one of the solutions is converting motels into transitional shelters. You can't go from a tent to an apartment. A shelter like a converted motel provides security and stability and access to services for Oregonians who need them.
So finally, I think having an independent voice yelling about it has motivated some change, and I'm going to take some credit for doing that. Now, it remains to be seen whether or not the mayor's ambitious plan to aggregate facilities that would have some services, sanitation, food, whether or not the sites that he's picked are going to be acceptable. I would nominate first and foremost the Expo Center. You could put, it's unused right now or minimally used. You could put some accommodations inside. There's a whole parking lot there.
All over the state, people are saying they're doing everything they can locally to resolve the challenge, and it's too big for them. And so my response to homelessness has been to say, as governor, I will declare a homelessness state of emergency. It does a few things. It's not just simply a question of whether or not you can supersede land use laws to cite a homeless village. It really is about taking all of the resources that are available at the state level and aligning them to, in a more holistic way, to support the populations that are on the street. But first, we have to know who's out there. We have to better understand what their needs are. We have to do assessments. And I believe that with the state taking a leading role, that it will support local governments.
So we've heard the candidates, especially Christine Drazan, talk about declaring a homeless state of emergency. Dana, we heard how Drazan says the state of emergency would work. How accurate is that, and how would declaring a state of emergency help the situation?
Unclear exactly how it could, but she is correct in saying that the state of emergency frees things up. You can move personnel, state personnel, you can move some state monies around. An example would be that at the height of the COVID crisis, Governor Brown did a state of emergency. She was able to activate the Oregon National Guard, and she used them at rural hospitals to backstop these hospitals that were badly, badly impacted by the pandemic. That's an example of a state of emergency and a very strong message. Now, the homelessness problem used to be, once upon a time, a big city issue. Today, it's in big cities, small cities, it's in towns, it's in rural areas. How would you do a state of emergency and get personnel out to where those things are? That's unclear to us. We're not sure exactly what this would look like, what kind of boots on the ground a state of emergency would look like. So the devil's in the details.
I want to switch to a related issue to the homeless crisis. That's the lack of housing, specifically affordable housing. Earlier this month, Emily Burris and I spoke with Marissa Zapata. She's the Associate Professor of Land Use Planning and the Director of Portland State University's Homelessness Research Action Collaborative. Zapata says her research shows the #1 and essentially the only factor causing homelessness is a lack of housing.
It's actually just the lack of housing.
Just the
I know
lack of
it's
housing.
shocking. It shocks everyone. And I think part of what it's hard for people to understand is that it seems simple, right? If it was just the lack of housing, how come we haven't fixed it?
Right.
And I think that that's the hardest thing for us to wrestle with. It is that simple, but it requires a thinking of values and thinking about how much we want to invest in housing and how much we want to support people who are poor. And that's a hard thing to wrestle with as a community.
Dana, lack of housing, lack of affordable housing, it's been an issue in this area for years now. How are we seeing this affect voter concerns?
Well, it is the #1 cause of a lot of things. Homelessness, for sure. The affordability of living in this area, the cost of living, for sure it is. I saw a study from Econ Northwest that said we need to build, I wrote this down, 584,000 housing units in the next 20 years to catch up with the historic underbuilding of housing that we've done. That needs 29,000 per year. And we don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have enough kind of affordable housing. We don't have medium family housing. We need it all up and down. Can a governor affect that? You bet a governor can. A governor can start saying, let's make that the priority for this session and the next session and the next session. The governor can say, let's change some of the land use rules, even if temporarily, or maybe there's some incentives for developers. There are a lot of things a governor can do, but I believe that the guest you had is absolutely right, that solving the historic underproduction of housing will solve many of the crises that we face right now in Oregon.
Will it be necessary to access federal funding in order to make that happen?
Sometimes you can. Sometimes it's relaxing some of the rules, saying we're going to fast track the ability to build housing, or maybe temporarily you remove some of the rules around what kind of housing you can do. Everybody knows it's really expensive and time-consuming and slow to get a housing development off the ground. Address those kinds of things. So sometimes it's throwing money at it, and sometimes it's lowering the blockades and just making it easier to build.
Thank you very much, Dana. Next, we're going to talk about gun violence and crime. We see this deadly epidemic throughout the state. How the gubernatorial candidates say they'll deal with it. Plus, we'll talk about the ballot measures that you'll be asked to vote on this November. We'll be right back.